This video will demonstrate a process for teaching students to recognize and deal with situations of uncertainty, as explained on page 12 of Section 2 of the Self-Study Guide at www.sauerberger.org/DONA/cross-credit T10. The link to download the checklist that we use is at www.sauerberger.org/DONA/checklist. The purpose of this training is to develop the ability to intuitively determine if the warning times of approaching vehicles are longer or shorter than your crossing time, and the ability to determine if you are in a situation of uncertainty. We are very grateful that Josh, a sighted student at the University of Pittsburgh's Orientation Mobility Program, agreed to pose as a student as we went through the various steps.
Looking at crossing a street where there's no traffic control. There's no stop sign, there's no traffic signal. So what we need to do is first of all find out how long it takes you to cross. So we're going to time your crossing. We're simulating blindness here. You haven't learned how to use a cane, so I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and cross with this. Hey Josh, go ahead. Alright, great, thank you. That was 6.5 seconds to cross. It was 7 seconds to get over here, 6.5 going over that way. We are going to take the longest one. So it takes you 7 seconds to cross at the speed that you were crossing. And it took about 3.5 to reach the middle. Okay? So now, thank you. So now I'm going to help you develop sort of an internal understanding of the crossing guard. What I'd like you to do is imagine a crossing. Tell me when you're starting your imaginary crossing, and then tell me when you think you're at the other side.
It is often difficult to imagine crossing when there are vehicles approaching. It can make people think they would be crossing faster than they normally would, so we prefer to wait until nothing was coming. But sometimes we did it with vehicles approaching.
Starting. Stop.
That was less than 5 seconds. So do you want to try it again, or do you want me to show you?
I'll try.
Crossing. You're gonna try again? Yeah. Okay. All right. Anytime you're ready.
Start.
Not bad. 6 seconds. Yeah, within a second of it. You want to try it again, or you want me to show you?
Go ahead and show me.
Show me. Okay. And you're starting halfway. Now you're on the other side. Does that kind of jive with what you were thinking? Awesome. All right. You're ready to start it again?
Starting. Stop.
7.25 seconds. Very nice. All right. We're going to do it for halfway across as well. So tell me when you're starting in your imagination and when you get to the middle.
Start. Stop.
Perfect. 3.75 seconds. Good. So you have an understanding, right? So
Because this was for demonstration purposes only, we stopped the training for intuitive understanding of crossing time once Josh had been correct only once, and you will see what happens when he tries to compare his crossing time with the warning time of approaching vehicles. We will use the TMAD checklist, filling out the detection to arrival times or warning times of approaching vehicles, and then make a conclusion.
all right, you've got your intuitive crossing time. You understand how long it takes. Now we're going to observe the traffic and find out if you're getting enough warning. So I'm going to use our little checklist. And ask you to report when you think you hear something that might be a vehicle. Don't wait until you're sure, but just tell me when you think something might be coming when it's quiet. Good. You were going to report that and then you thought better. Why?
Because I wasn't having
Yeah, that's right. And it wasn't quite quiet yet when you heard it, so good. So we want to wait till it's quiet and then report. Good, good. I think there was enough from the left. Enough warning. It didn't sound like it. It was actually 4.5, almost 5 seconds. So that was enough. I'm going to put it was from the left and it was 4.5.
The next car is also from the left, and Josh is able to hear it when it is 6 seconds away. He needs only 3.5 seconds to cross that half of the street, so it gives him plenty of warning.
Do you think that if you started just before you heard him, you would have made it out of his lane? Yeah, that was 6.1.
Start.
I'm going to start it out again. That wasn't sound. Thank you for reporting that. That's what I want you to do.
In this next trial, Josh hears cars from both directions, and they each pass him 10 seconds later. He needs 7 seconds to cross the street and get clear of the car from the right.
I want you to imagine you started just before you heard him, and tell me if you think you'd be on the other side by the time he gets here. Have you been on the other side by then?
Josh said that was about 6 seconds.
Yeah, like 6 seconds.
Okay, we're going to avoid numbers. We're going to go for the back.
Oh, like I have to quite cross.
You would not have finished. That was actually 10 seconds.
Was that?
Yeah, and so twice you kind of misjudged them. So what we could do is go back to your intuitive crossing time and make sure that that's nailed down. Also, I want you to imagine yourself. As soon as you hear it, imagine that you started crossing just before you heard it, and imagine where you'd be when he arrives. I'll worry about the timing. I'll worry about when it stops, when it gets here. And so let's do that, and if it's still a problem, we'll go back to intuitive crossing time and get that nailed down. Because I think what's happening is you're distracted with, measuring the time, and what I want you to do is imagine yourself crossing. Wow, we didn't hear them do it right almost upon us. And why do you think we didn't hear them? There was still receding sound of our car. Good. You seem to understand the importance of waiting till it's quiet. Even the slightest receding sound can keep you confused.
Next, Josh hears a car from the right, and he needs 7 seconds to get out of its way.
Start.
You imagine that you had started to cross just before you heard it. Would you have made it to the other side?
Josh said yes.
That's 5.9 seconds. So let's work on your intuitive crossing time a little bit.
Since Josh continued to misjudge the warning times of approaching vehicles, we resumed his training to develop an intuitive understanding of his crossing time.
So, you want to try it yourself, or want me to? We're going to do the intuitive crossing. You're doing it.
Start.
Nailed it. 7.1. Yeah. Did you alter it because you knew you were running your own, or is that? Yeah. Okay. So knowing that you were missing it, you adjusted it, and nicely done. All right, let's just try one more time.
Start.
Because it was longer than 8 seconds, Donna wanted to continue the training until Josh's intuitive understanding of his crossing time was more accurate.
Even when you think you take longer than you actually do, I want to actually make it accurate within a second. So I normally would have done some more. But, well, let's do that. Try to get more accurate. 7.8. Beautiful. You're not counting, are you?
Try to feel it.
You're trying to feel imagine yourself crossing? Beautiful. So you're not counting 1, 2, right? Good. Or counting steps or anything like that. You just kind of imagine yourself crossing. Beautiful. All right, I think you got it. Now that we've worked on your intuitive crossing time a little bit, I want to see if you're accurately judging the approaches. So the next time you hear something that might be a vehicle, start it and imagine you were crossing.
Josh hears a car from the right now.
Good. You're crossing. You stepped up just before you heard him. Still walking. Still walking. Would you move the other side? Yeah. Plenty of time to spare, or just left a second or two to spare. Exactly. It was 8:27. Exactly. So you would have just stepped up, and then a second or two later. Very nice. Much better.
After reestablishing Josh's intuitive understanding of his crossing time, he was consistently able to compare it to the warning times of approaching vehicles. With that part of the training complete, we then turned our attention to having him learn to determine when he is in a situation of uncertainty. We used the TMAD checklist to give him some practice determining if this is a situation of uncertainty.
We've been taking some samples, and we found that from the left, we had 2 samples from the left. Both of them were longer than what you needed, 4.5 and 6.1 seconds. From the right, we had one that was 10 seconds, which was more than enough. We had one that you didn't hear when it was quiet until it was less than 6 seconds, or about 6 seconds. So actually, if you look at our little checklist, it says from the right, was the warning time of any vehicle shorter than the crossing time? If yes, this is a, what do you think this is? It's uncertain situation, exactly. So our work here is done because we have a yes from the right, and so that is done. But
when we determined that this was a situation of uncertainty, Josh talked about whether it was safe. And that was a perfect segue to the next step, which is analyzing the risk of crossing.
Now we're going to talk about safety. The definition we're going to use of safe is the risk is acceptable. So we're going to find out, is the risk of crossing here acceptable? So we're going to use a little checklist here. Analyze what is the risk of crossing here when we know we're in a situation of uncertainty. And we're going to look at, first of all, do you have the right of way here? We'll talk about that in a minute. And then, what are the chances that you're going to be seriously injured or killed crossing here when we know it's a situation of uncertainty? So, the first one, do you have the right of way here? If a sidewalk comes up to the street and there's a sidewalk on the other side coming up, where they would have been if there wasn't a street is considered a crosswalk, even though it's not painted. This is what is called an unmarked crosswalk. So you do have the right of way here to cross in Pennsylvania. Now we're going to look at the likelihood you're going to be seriously injured or killed. That's going to depend on 3 things. First of all, how likely is it you're going to be surprised? You know, you think it's clear like now, and there actually is a car coming that you didn't hear. And if that does happen, how likely is it that it's going to hit you or wait for you? And if it does hit you, how likely is it to be seriously injured? So let's take a look at the first one. The likelihood that you're going to be surprised depends on the traffic volume and how much warning you have. So traffic volume, would you say high traffic volume, middle traffic volume, low traffic volume?
That's between medium and low.
Medium to low traffic volume. Now, the warning time. From the left, what do you think? Are you having enough
I
warning?
believe I was given a warning from the left.
Yeah, you have plenty of warning from the left. It's only from the right that we're worried. And you were able to hear them.
It's pretty close to the
It's almost enough. Yeah, almost enough warning. Given that the traffic is moderately low in volume, and that the area that where a car could be that you couldn't hear it but it could reach you is relatively small, what do you think the chances are that as you step out, it's quiet, you think it's clear to go, and it's not? What the chances are that it's incoming? You say high, middle, low?
I'd say middle because it's a decent amount of traffic.
Okay, so we're going to change the traffic volume kind of like moderately high, right? I'm so glad you said that, because when we first came here, the traffic volume was kind of low. Right now it's gotten higher, and so that's why we always say you can only analyze situations. You can't analyze crossings because things can vary. Within the few moments that we've been standing here, it has varied, and now the traffic volume is moderately high, right? So would you say the chance that it's quiet and there's a car coming that you didn't know is high, middle, or low? Middle, no chance that... Okay. If a car is coming that you didn't know and you step out, we're going to talk about what are the chances that it's going to go ahead and hit you. And these depend on different variables. First of all, is there more than one lane approaching in each direction, so that if a car approaches and stops or slows down for you, another one might pass it around. So there's only one lane in each way, so that's not an issue.
We continued to rate each variable on the list and decided the speed of the vehicles was moderate and drivers were not expecting pedestrians.
Visibility from both directions. The sun is out, it's not dark, lighting's pretty good. What about the visibility from approaching?
From the left it's pretty high, from the right it's a little bit lower. There's a ramp, it's sort of blocking the view.
Okay, so they don't see us until they come around that bend.
We decided the road conditions were good and there was no group of pedestrians he could walk with. Then we discussed whether he would feel comfortable waiting with a foot in the street.
If you're waiting with one foot in the street, research shows that they're more likely to stop you than if you're standing back. Would you feel comfortable waiting with a foot in the street?
Yeah.
You feel comfortable. There's parking lanes, you're in a parking lane.
We laughed when deciding whether he'd be using a cane, since this is all hypothetical, and decided he would not. But I shared the research that indicated drivers would be more than twice as likely to stop if he did have a cane. For the last category, Josh said that the drivers in that area tended to be respectful of pedestrians. We then summarized that conditions that made it more likely drivers would stop included the fact that there was only one lane in each direction, road conditions were good, Josh could wait with a foot in the street, and drivers in the area tended to respect pedestrians. Conditions that made it more likely the drivers would hit him included the fact that they weren't expecting him, and from the right they couldn't see him from very far. He'd be crossing alone, and he wouldn't have a cane.
So what do you think the chances are that it's going to hit you if you're surprised? Highly likely they're going to hit you. Middle likelihood they're going to hit you, or not likely to hit you. Middle of the road. Middle possibility. Now we're going to talk about if they hit you, what are the chances you're going to be seriously injured or killed? And that depends on speed. I've got a little chart here. And I would say they're going about 30 miles an hour here. And so the chances of being seriously injured or killed is 42%. pulling all of that together, the chances that when it's quiet, there's actually a car coming is little. It's 50-50 chance that you're gonna be surprised. And if you are surprised, it's a moderate chance that they're gonna go ahead and hit you. If they do hit you, there's about a 42% chance that they're gonna seriously injure or kill you.
After Josh considered all these factors, he decided that the risk of crossing under these conditions was not acceptable, and we considered alternatives. This session, then, helped the student develop an intuitive understanding of crossing time and then be able to compare crossing time with the warning time of approaching vehicles, a skill that is necessary for being able to recognize situations of uncertainty. Josh also practiced analyzing the risks of crossing in situations of uncertainty, make decisions about whether those risks are acceptable, and consider alternatives. Once the student has these skills, he's ready to learn to recognize situations of uncertainty by observing a variety of situations and guessing if those are situations of uncertainty, and then finding out if he was correct. For example, if Josh had the necessary skills when we first arrived at this crossing, we could have asked him to simply observe and guess if it is a situation of uncertainty or not. As his instructor, we would have filled out the first page of the TMAD checklist with his name and date, indicating that he would be using his hearing, and indicating that, although there was plenty of traffic noises that could mask the sound of approaching vehicles, there was no noise that was both steady and temporary, such as a lawnmower or an air conditioner that started generating noise. Let's say that after his initial observation, based on his estimate of the width of the street and the warning times of approaching vehicles, Josh guessed it was a situation of confidence. We would then measure his crossing time and use the back of the TMAD checklist to record the warning times of approaching vehicles, and then go to the flow chart below and determine that, oops, Josh was wrong. It was a situation of uncertainty. We can now record this as situation number 1 in the checklist for teaching students to recognize situations of uncertainty. This checklist has a chart, and we would record that situation number 1 was a situation of uncertainty and that the student guessed incorrectly. We would continue to have the student assess various situations and record them in this chart until we had at least one situation of uncertainty and one situation of confidence that the student assessed correctly. Let's say, in this hypothetical case, the student assessed the next 5 situations correctly, 3 situations of uncertainty and 2 situations of confidence, which meets the criteria of at least one of each situation identified correctly. More information can be found in the self-study guide Preparing Visually Impaired Students for Uncontrolled Crossings at www.sauerberger.org/DONA/cross-credit. This is with grateful appreciation to Jolene Troisi and Josh Kingsbury. Their collaboration in making this video was invaluable.